Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine in 2022 sent shockwaves through the international community. The echoes of history reverberated, with many drawing stark comparisons between Putin's actions and the aggressions of Adolf Hitler in the 1930s. The parallels in rhetoric, territorial ambitions, and disregard for international norms are deeply disturbing. Putin's strategies raise urgent questions about modern authoritarianism and the potential for history to repeat itself. The similarities in their justifications for violence and expansionist ambitions are impossible to ignore. The most striking similarity between Hitler and Putin lies in their use of rhetoric to justify territorial expansion. Both leaders employed a potent blend of historical revisionism, nationalist sentiment, and fabricated threats to legitimize their aggression. They painted their neighbors as existential enemies, portraying their own actions as defensive measures against fabricated threats. Hitler infamously used the plight of German minorities in neighboring countries, such as the Sudetenland in Czechoslovakia, as a pretext for invasion. He claimed that these German populations were being oppressed and that Germany had a duty to protect them. Similarly, Putin has repeatedly invoked the alleged persecution of Russian speakers in Ukraine to justify his military interventions. This manipulation of language and history is a hallmark of authoritarian regimes seeking to expand their power. By distorting the past and creating a narrative of victimhood, they aim to rally their populations behind their aggressive actions. The parallels in the rhetoric employed by Hitler and Putin serve as a chilling reminder of the dangers of unchecked nationalism and the ease with which historical grievances can be weaponized for political gain. Central to understanding Putin's ideology is the concept of Russism, a term gaining increasing traction among scholars and commentators. Russism describes a toxic blend of Russian nationalism, religious orthodoxy, and imperial nostalgia that has come to define Putin's regime. It draws upon a romanticized vision of Russia's past, emphasizing its imperial grandeur and its supposed role as a bulwark against Western decadence. This ideology is deeply intertwined with a sense of historical grievance and a belief that Russia has been wronged by the West. Putin has repeatedly lamented the collapse of the Soviet Union, calling it the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century. He views the expansion of NATO eastward as an act of aggression by the West and sees himself as restoring Russia's rightful place on the world stage. This dangerous mix of nationalism, imperialism, and historical revisionism has fueled Putin's aggressive foreign policy. It provides a framework for understanding his actions in Ukraine, as well as his broader ambitions to reassert Russian dominance in the former Soviet sphere. Russism, with its echoes of past empires and its glorification of a mythical past, poses a serious threat to peace and stability in the region. Both Hitler and Putin excelled at manufacturing threats and manipulating language to demonize their opponents. They skillfully exploited existing tensions and prejudices, amplifying them into existential dangers that required decisive action. This tactic allowed them to justify their aggression, both domestically and on the international stage. Hitler relentlessly propagated the myth of a Jewish conspiracy threatening Germany from within, portraying Jews as a parasitic force undermining the nation's strength. This poisonous propaganda paved the way for the Holocaust, the systematic genocide of European Jews. Similarly, Putin has demonized Ukrainians, painting them as neo-Nazis and puppets of the West. He has accused the Ukrainian government of committing genocide against Russian speakers in the Donbas region, a baseless claim intended to justify his military intervention. The language of oppression is remarkably consistent across time and regimes. By labeling their opponents as enemies of the people, threats to national security, or agents of foreign powers, authoritarian leaders create a climate of fear and suspicion that allows them to silence dissent and consolidate their power. The parallels in the ways Hitler and Putin employed these tactics are a stark reminder of the fragility of democratic institutions and the constant need for vigilance against the forces of intolerance and hatred. Section 5. The Crimean Annexation, a textbook case of historical revisionism. The 2014 annexation of Crimea by Russia is a clear example of historical revisionism. Putin claimed Crimea was always part of Russia, ignoring its complex history and international recognition. He invoked Soviet victory in World War II, arguing Crimea's return was historical justice. This mirrors Hitler's justification for annexing the Sudetenland in 1938. Both leaders manipulated history to legitimize aggression. The Crimean annexation warns of the dangers of manipulating historical narratives for political purposes. The parallels between Hitler's aggression in the 1930s and Putin's actions in Ukraine have raised concerns about the potential for appeasement to embolden authoritarian leaders. The appeasement policies of Britain and France towards Hitler, culminating in the Munich Agreement of 1938, are often cited as a cautionary tale of the dangers of failing to confront aggression early on. The Munich Agreement, in which Britain and France ceded the Sudetenland to Germany in the hope of averting war, is widely regarded as a strategic blunder. It failed to satisfy Hitler's appetite for expansion and only emboldened him to pursue further aggression. Some argue that the West's initial reluctance to impose tough sanctions on Russia and provide Ukraine with significant military aid reflects a similar pattern of appeasement that could have dangerous consequences. While the historical context is different, the lessons of appeasement remain relevant. Failing to confront aggression and hold authoritarian leaders accountable can have devastating consequences. The international community's response to Putin's actions in Ukraine will have far-reaching implications for the future of Europe and the global order. One of the most disturbing aspects of Putin's rhetoric is his denial of Ukraine's right to exist as an independent nation. Putin has repeatedly asserted that Ukraine is not a real country, but rather an artificial creation of the Soviet Union. He claims that Ukrainians and Russians are one people and that Ukraine's rightful place is within a Russian sphere of influence. This line of argument bears a chilling resemblance to Hitler's views on Czechoslovakia. Hitler dismissed Czechoslovakia as an artificial state created by the Treaty of Versailles and claimed that its existence was a threat to German security. He argued that the Czechs and Slovaks belonged to a greater German Reich and that their independence was an anomaly that needed to be corrected. The denial of a nation's right to exist based on historical revisionism and ethnic nationalism is a hallmark of totalitarian ideologies. It reflects a fundamental disregard for the principles of self-determination and the territorial integrity of states. Putin's attempts to erase Ukraine's identity and legitimacy as a nation represent a dangerous step backwards for Europe and the world. The parallels between Hitler and Putin are striking, particularly in their rhetoric and use of nationalism. Both leaders have employed fervent nationalist rhetoric to galvanize support, invoking a sense of historical destiny and national pride. Their territorial ambitions also bear a resemblance. Hitler sought to expand Germany's borders under the guise of uniting all ethnic Germans, while Putin has used similar justifications for his actions in Ukraine. Both have also fabricated threats to justify their aggression. Hitler demonized Jews and other minorities as existential threats to Germany, while Putin has portrayed Ukraine and the West as threats to Russian sovereignty. Their ideologies are rooted in a belief in their nation's exceptionalism and a disdain for international norms. Both have shown a willingness to use military force to achieve their goals, disregarding international law and the sovereignty of other nations. These similarities should serve as a wake-up call to the international community, highlighting the need for vigilance and a strong response to prevent history from repeating itself. The parallels between Putin's playbook and Hitler's strategies underscore the importance of historical awareness in confronting modern tyranny. By studying the past, we can identify recurring patterns of authoritarian behavior, understand the dangers of unchecked nationalism, and develop strategies for resisting oppression. The lessons of history can serve as a guide for navigating the complex challenges of the present and preventing the tragedies of the past from repeating themselves. It is our responsibility to learn from the mistakes of previous generations and stand up for democratic values in the face of authoritarian aggression. We must be vigilant in calling out historical revisionism, challenging hate speech, and supporting those who are fighting for their freedom and sovereignty. The struggle against tyranny is ongoing, and it requires constant vigilance and a commitment to upholding the principles of democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. By remembering the lessons of the past and confronting the challenges of the present with clear eyes and unwavering determination, we can work towards a future where peace and freedom prevail.